92nd Street Y online media is made possible by the generous support of the Sidney E. Frank Foundation and by listeners like you. This program features Saul Bellow reading from his work. It was recorded October 10th, 1988, before a live audience at New York's 92nd Street Y.
Very different from the young poet with whom I had gone to Hoboken to eat clams. He was now thick and stout. He charged down Barrow Street, the first poet in America with power brakes, he said. He was full of car mystique, but he didn't know how to park. I watched him trying to back into an adequate space. My own theory was that the way people parked had much to do with their intimate self-image and revealed how they felt about their own backsides. Humboldt twice got a rear wheel up on the curb and finally gave up, turning off the ignition. In a checked sports jacket and strap-fastened polo boots, he came out swinging shut a door that seemed 2 yards long. His greeting was silent. The large lips were closed. His gray eyes seemed more widely separated than ever, the surfaced whale beside a dory. His handsome face had thickened and deteriorated. It was sumptuous. It was Buddhistic, but it was not tranquil. So, from the present, I see two odd dolls in the front seat of the roaring, grinding four-holer. This Buick was all over mud and looked like a staff car from Flanders Field. The wheels were out of line. The big tires pounded eccentrically. Through the thin sunlight of early autumn, Humboldt drove fast, taking advantage of the Sunday emptiness of the streets. He was a terrible driver, making left turns from the right side, spurting, then dragging, tailgating. I disapproved. Of course, I was much better with a car, but comparisons were absurd because this was Humboldt, not a driver. Steering, he was humped huge over the wheel. He had small boy tremors of the hands and feet. He kept the cigarette holder between his teeth. He was agitated, talking away, entertaining, provoking, informing, and snowing me. He hadn't slept last night. He seemed in poor health. Of course, he drank, and he dosed himself with pills, lots of pills. In his briefcase, he carried the Merck manual. It was bound in black like the Bible. He consulted it often. The car walloped the pavement, charging toward the Holland Tunnel. Close to the large form of Humboldt, this motoring giant, in the awful upholstered luxury of the front seat, I felt the ideas and illusions that went with him. He was always accompanied by a swarm, a huge volume of notions. He said how changed the Jersey swamps were even in his lifetime, with roads, dumps, and factories. And what would a Buick like this with power brakes and power steering have meant even 50 years ago? Imagine Henry James as a driver, or Walt Whitman, or Mallarmé. We were off. He discussed machinery, luxury, command, capitalism, technology, mammon, Orpheus, and poetry, the riches of the human heart, America, and world civilization. His task was to put all of this and more together. The car went snoring and squealing through the tunnel and came out in bright sunlight. Tall stacks of filth artillery fired silently into the Sunday sky with beautiful bursts of smoke. The acid smell of gas refineries went into your lungs like a spur. The rushes were as brown as onion soup. There were seagoing tankers stuck in the channels. The wind boomed. The great clouds were white. Far out, the massed New Jersey bungalows had the look of a necropolis to be. Through the pale sun of the streets, the living went to church. Under Humboldt's polo boot, the carburetor gasped. The eccentric tires thumped fast on the slabs of the highway. The gusts were so strong that even the heavy Buick fluttered. We plunged over the Pulaski Skyway, while the stripes of girder shadows came at us through the shuddering windshield. In the back seat were books, bottles, beer cans, and paper bags. Tristan Corbière, I remember, Les Amours Jaunes in a yellow jacket, and the Police Gazette, pink, with pictures of vulgar cops and sinful kitty cats. Humboldt's house was in the New Jersey back country, near the Pennsylvania line. This marginal land was good for nothing but chicken farms. The approaches were unpaved, and we drove in dust. Briars lashed the roadmaster as we swayed on huge springs through rubbishy fields where white boulders sat. The busted muffler was so loud that though the car filled the lane, there was no need to honk. You could hear us coming. Humboldt yelled, "Here's our place," and swerved. We rolled over a hummock or earth wave. The front of the Buick rose and then dived into the weeds. He squeezed the horn, fearing for his cats, but the cats lit out and found safety on the roof of the woodshed, which had collapsed under the snow last winter. Kathleen was waiting in the yard, large, fair-skinned, and beautiful. Her face, in the feminine vocabulary of praise, had wonderful bones. But she was pale, and she had no country color at all. Humboldt said she seldom went outside. She sat in the house reading books. It was exactly like Bedford Street here, except that the surrounding slum was rural. I saw the position into which Humboldt had placed Kathleen, and I put it into words. He was saying, "Lie there, hold still, and don't wiggle. My happiness may be peculiar, but once happy, I will make you happy, happier than you ever dreamed. When I am satisfied, the blessings of fulfillment will flow to all mankind." Wasn't this, I thought, the message of modern power? This was the voice of the crazy tyrant speaking with peculiar lusts to consummate, for which everyone must hold still. I grasped it at once. Then I thought that Kathleen must have secret feminine reasons for going along. I too was supposed to go along, and in another fashion, I too was to hold still. Humboldt had plans for me beyond Princeton. When he wasn't a poet, he was a fanatical schemer, and I was peculiarly susceptible to his influence. Why that was, I have only recently begun to understand. But he thrilled me continually. Whatever he did was delicious. Kathleen seemed aware of this and smiled to herself as I came out of the car. I stood on the down-beaten grass. "Breathe the air," Humboldt said. "Different from Bedford Street, hey?" He then quoted, "This castle hath a pleasant seat. Also, the heaven's breath smells wooingly here." We then started to play football. He and Kathleen played all the time. This was why the grass was trampled. Kathleen spent most of the day reading, for to understand what her husband was talking about, she had to catch up, she said, on James, Proust, Edith Wharton, Karl Marx, Freud, and so on. "I have to make a scene to get her out of the house for a little football," said Humboldt. She threw a very good pass, a hard, accurate spiral. Her voice trailed as she ran bare-legged, and made the catch on her breast. The ball in flight wagged like a duck's tail. It flew under the maples over the clothesline. After confinement in the car and in my interview clothes, I was glad to play. Humboldt was a heavy, choppy runner, and in their sweaters, he and Kathleen looked like two rookies, big, fair, padded out. Humboldt said, "Look at Charlie jumping like Nijinsky." I was as much Nijinsky as his house was Macbeth's castle.
Thanks for listening. 92nd Street Y Unterberg Poetry Center webcasts and access to our archive are made possible by the generous support of the Sidney E. Frank Foundation. For more information on the 92nd Street Y and all of our programs, please visit us on the web at 92y.org. This program is copyright 1988 by the 92nd Street Y.